The city was rough, loud, and alive. Steam rose from the grates while sirens cut through the night, and the skyline glowed with both promise and danger. In those years, New York was broke, burning, and yet somehow more alive than ever. Trash piled on the sidewalks, graffiti became poetry on the walls, and every block told a story of survival. It was a time when creativity was born from chaos, and the heartbeat of the streets echoed with defiance, rhythm, and hope. This is the New York that refused to die, the true grit and soul of the 70s. New York in the 1970s was a city that never closed its eyes. The hum of car horns, shouting vendors, and distant sirens blended into a restless symphony that defined every corner from Harlem to the Lower East Side. It was a place of tension and movement, where danger and dreams shared the same pavement. The sidewalks were cracked, the lights flickered, and yet people kept walking fast, determined, and alive. Amidst this chaos, the streets became a stage. Taxi drivers argued over fares, children played stickball beside overflowing trash bins, and the smell of pizza mixed with gasoline. It was noisy, imperfect, and full of character, a daily performance of survival that captured what no photograph could truly hold. Even when the city teetered on collapse, its pulse never slowed. The nights carried their own kind of beauty. Streetlights glowed through the smog, illuminating graffiti-covered walls and faces that had seen too much. Lovers met on stoops, hustlers negotiated under flickering neon, and jazz drifted from basement clubs until dawn. In that sleepless rhythm, New York revealed its rawest truth, a place too proud to rest. The city's heartbeat came from its people. From factory workers catching the late train to musicians carrying battered instruments across wet avenues, everybody contributed to the noise that kept the city awake. For better or worse, these streets didn't just host life, they were life itself, gritty and unrepeatable. Beneath the city's surface, another New York existed, one written in paint, dust, and rebellion. The subway system became the underground diary of an entire generation, its walls covered in colors that screamed louder than any billboard above ground. Graffiti wasn't vandalism for many. It was language, identity, a cry from those the city tried to ignore. Trains rumbled through tunnels as moving galleries, carrying names like Taki 183 and Lee Quinones to every borough. Young artists, often teenagers, risked arrest to leave a mark on steel and concrete. Each tag was a declaration. I exist, I belong, I matter. To those who rode daily, these works turned long commutes into silent conversations about pride, power, and place. The subway cars told the truth about the city's mood. Rusted, dimly lit, and unpredictable, they reflected both decay and defiance. Strangers avoided eye contact, musicians played for spare change, and rats darted between tracks. Yet, there was an odd comfort in that shared discomfort. Everyone inside was part of the same unfiltered reality. When graffiti eventually began to fade under new policies and cleaner trains, a piece of New York's voice went with it. The silence of the tunnels could never replace the echo of that art, born from darkness but filled with light, reminding everyone that beauty can bloom even in the dirtiest corners of the city. On a humid July night, New York's lights vanished. The entire city fell into darkness, and in that silence, the real character of its people emerged. The blackout of 1977 began with a lightning strike in the Hudson Valley, but what followed became one of the most chaotic nights in urban history. Looting and fires erupted across neighborhoods already pushed to the edge by poverty and frustration. Television screens went black, police radios buzzed non-stop, and the sound of breaking glass echoed through the boroughs. Yet amid the chaos, there were moments of unity, neighbors helping each other, sharing candles, and guarding local stores together. The event revealed a city split in two, one desperate to survive, the other desperate to be seen. The darkness exposed more than broken infrastructure, it showed how deep the city's wounds really ran. When power returned, the damage was visible everywhere. Burned shops, shattered trust, and exhausted faces under the harsh fluorescent glow. Still, out of that long night came a strange resilience. People understood what it meant to rely on one another when everything else failed. The blackout became both a tragedy and a symbol proof that even when New York went dark, its spirit refused to flicker out. Before the polished lights and glossy billboards, Times Square was something else entirely. In the 1970s, it was raw, electric, and dangerous, the crossroads of everything the city tried to hide. The theaters were fading, the peep shows booming, and the smell of popcorn mixed with rain-soaked concrete. It wasn't glamorous, but it was alive. Every night, the square pulsed with hustlers, cab drivers, and lost dreamers chasing whatever they could find. Neon signs flickered half-lit, and movie marquees promised more than they delivered. It was a carnival of contradictions, where the fantasy of New York met the harshness of reality. Those who walked through it felt both thrill and threat in the same heartbeat. Behind the grime, however, Times Square carried the stories of forgotten performers and street artists. Musicians played saxophones under marquees, while actors from nearby theaters lingered between auditions. There was something magnetic about it, a reminder that even in decay, art still found its stage. When the city cleaned it up decades later, something essential was lost. The chaos, the color, the danger, all replaced by safety and shine. The Times Square of the 70s may have been rough, but it was undeniably real, pulsing with the grit and soul that defined the city itself. The Bronx became a symbol of urban collapse during the 1970s. Block after block burned under orange skies, while fire trucks raced from one emergency to another. Entire neighborhoods disappeared, victims of arson, neglect, and broken policies that left residents stranded between poverty and politics. Abandoned buildings became playgrounds for kids and shelters for the desperate. The phrase, "The Bronx is burning," wasn't just a headline, it was daily life. Yet even in destruction, the community refused to surrender. Music, especially the early beats of hip-hop, rose from the ashes, echoing from turntables and park jams, turning pain into rhythm. Families looked out for each other when institutions didn't. Block parties offered relief from despair, and graffiti-covered walls became memorials to what once stood. Those who lived through it remember the smell of smoke and the sound of laughter trying to drown it out. The Bronx didn't just survive the flames, it redefined what survival meant. When the fires finally slowed, what remained was resilience carved into every brick. From the ruins came voices that would change global culture: rappers, breakdancers, poets, and visionaries. The Bronx burned, but it also gave birth to a new world, proving once more that even destruction can't erase the heartbeat of New York. Can pain really create something that powerful? In the late 1970s, New York split into two sounds that defined an era. Downtown, punk was raw rebellion, a shout against the system, while uptown, disco pulsed with freedom, glitter, and rhythm. Both grew from the same city, struggling with chaos, turning frustration into music that demanded to be heard. Punk found its home in grimy clubs like country, bluegrass, and blues, where broken amps and sweat-filled rooms hosted legends in the making. Across town, Studio 54 shimmered with a different kind of energy. Under the spinning lights, everyone, rich, poor, black, white, gay, straight, danced side by side. Disco became a form of escape, a bright defiance against the darkness outside. Where punk tore down walls, disco built temporary heavens. Each beat carried the city's contradictions, from rage to release. The two worlds rarely met but shared the same hunger: to express something real. Punk stripped music to its bones, while disco dressed it in sequins. Both spoke to people who needed to feel alive in a city falling apart. The contrast made New York the epicenter of sound and identity. Those nights changed more than music, they changed the culture itself. Out of the wreckage came movements that would ripple through decades: fashion, attitude, and courage. New York danced and screamed its way through despair, proving that even the hardest times could create unforgettable rhythm. South of Houston Street, in cold, abandoned warehouses, something revolutionary was happening. Young artists transformed empty industrial spaces into homes, studios, and playgrounds for creativity. These illegal lofts became the heart of Soho and Tribeca's underground art movement, long before they turned into the city's most expensive neighborhoods. Painters like Jean-Michel Basquiat and Keith Haring blurred the line between street and gallery, while photographers and sculptors experimented without limits. Every wall, floor, and ceiling became a canvas. The smell of paint, mixed with cheap coffee, and conversations about art lasted until sunrise. In those dimly lit rooms, a new kind of New York was being born. Money was scarce, but freedom was abundant. Rent was cheap, the buildings were crumbling, and no one cared. That was the beauty of it. Artists traded work for food, hosted exhibitions in their own spaces, and lived off passion alone. Their grit turned decay into inspiration, and their names would one day echo in museums around the world. Before the galleries, before the fame, there was only the city's pulse, rough, loud, and alive. The lofts were not just studios, they were sanctuaries of rebellion and imagination. From those forgotten floors rose the modern art scene, shaping how the world would see New York forever. In 1975, New York faced its darkest economic hour. The city, once the financial capital of the world, stood on the edge of bankruptcy. Streets filled with trash from unpaid sanitation workers, crime rates soared, and layoffs crippled essential services. Headlines screamed collapse, and Washington refused to help, at least at first. President Gerald Ford's infamous drop-dead headline wasn't exactly what he said, but it captured the mood perfectly. The city felt abandoned, left to solve its own disaster. Mayor Abraham Beame fought to keep basic functions alive, borrowing money just to pay salaries. Subway cars were tagged, schools underfunded, and hospitals overflowing, a metropolis gasping for air. But New Yorkers did what they always did best: adapt. Local leaders, unions, and citizens came together to negotiate, rebuild, and reinvent the city's finances. It wasn't pretty, but it was resilient. People continued to work, to hustle, to create, even when the lights dimmed and hope seemed thin. By the decade's end, the worst had passed. The crisis became a defining moment in civic pride and perseverance. New York learned to survive on grit instead of glamour, laying the foundation for the city's eventual rebirth in the following years. Amid the fires, strikes, and blackouts, something unbreakable held New York together: its neighborhoods. Communities became families when institutions failed. On stoops, in bodegas, and at block parties, people shared food, laughter, and strength. Even in the toughest boroughs, kindness was currency, and survival was a collective act. In places like Brooklyn's Bedford-Stuyvesant, Queens' Jackson Heights, and Manhattan's Washington Heights, residents created support networks that crossed cultures and generations. Street festivals celebrated roots, and local churches became command centers for hope. The city's diversity turned struggle into solidarity, reminding everyone that home meant more than an address. Children played double dutch on cracked sidewalks, while parents watched from fire escapes, gossiping and smiling despite the heat. Music flowed through every open window: salsa, soul, rock, and disco blending into one soundtrack of endurance. These moments gave life a sense of normalcy amid the chaos. The decade proved that true wealth wasn't measured in money or safety, but in connection. When outsiders wrote New York off, the people wrote their own story. The neighborhoods became the heart that kept the city breathing, one block at a time. While much of the city struggled, Yankee Stadium remained a beacon of pride. Baseball became a refuge, a stage where hope returned night after night. Fans packed the stands, waving pennants, escaping the city's troubles for 9 innings of magic. For a few hours, everyone from Wall Street to the Bronx was united. The 1977 World Series became legend. Reggie Jackson hit 3 home runs in a single game, earning the nickname Mr. October. His swagger reflected the city itself, bruised, loud, but impossible to ignore. Each crack of the bat echoed like defiance, proving New York still had fight left in it. The stadium wasn't just about sports. It was a meeting place for generations, where fathers shared hot dogs with sons and grandmothers cheered louder than anyone. The smell of peanuts, the sound of organ music, the roar of the crowd, They all stitched the city's spirit back together, one cheer at a time. As the decade closed, the Yankees' victories felt symbolic. Against all odds, the city had survived its hardest years and still found something to celebrate. The diamond in the Bronx shone brighter than any skyline light, reminding New Yorkers that no matter how rough the times, their soul was indestructible. New York in the 1970s was broken but alive. Through blackouts, fires, and chaos, the city never stopped moving. Its people turned struggle into art and noise into rhythm. Even at its lowest, the city's pulse stayed strong. This wasn't a place of comfort, but of courage. Those who endured didn't just survive, they defined what New York means. If that spirit still beats in your heart, keep it alive, subscribe, and feel the city's soul once more.